Good evening and welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. My name is Merope. I am one of the directors of Soho Rep, and we're so thrilled to be gathering this evening to celebrate the work of the incredible writer, performer, downtown theater maker extraordinaire, and as of today, podcaster, Carmelita Tropicana, who is also one of the artists participating in project number 1, a program at Soho Rep this year. So without further ado, I would love to pass it right over to Carmelita to get us started.
Okay, no problem. Am I on? Okay. Hello, bienvenidos. Hello, people. I am so happy to be here with you today. We are launching a podcast as part of my project in project number 1 for Soho Rep. We are coming to you live. It's live from the Soho Rep Theater. And it's exciting because I'm going to be reading an excerpt of the first episode. We're going to be launching 3 episodes today. And the 3 episodes are called, the podcast is called That's Not What Happened. And the first episode is called Cuban Roots, which I'm gonna read a little bit from, an excerpt of it. And this is different from the podcast. I mean, what's really great, I've gotten really into podcasts because, you know, you're in a studio, you record, they get the best things. You know, if you flub a line, they can clean it up. And it sounds like it's really coming into your ear. It's very intimate. And also there's amazing music to go along with it. So what you're getting is a very stripped down version, but a live version of the podcast. So I'm going to be reading from That's Not What Happened, and then I will be talking to my amazing friend Solana Chehtman. So, and we'll have questions and answers, you know, with her, and also some questions if you want to, you know, people out there in the Zoom land, if you want to put some questions in, we'll be really happy to answer them. So without further ado, this podcast, which was an amazing collaborative project with my sister Ella Troiano, who did, you know, who was a director, a dramaturgy and producer, and Margaret Crimmins, who did the sound, and the beautiful Mark Rebo's music. That is amazing. You will get now me, Carmelita, reading. That's not what happened. That's what my sister said about a story in my memoir. This is my memoir, what I remember. And can we ever get at the truth? I didn't want to come here to the US. I'm a kid having fun in Cuba. My sister was reading comic books, Donald Duck, Archie, all in English. She was preparing. I was experiencing a lot of hygge. I know it's a Danish concept associated with cold winter nights, the comfort of reading a good book by a fire. But if we adopt or adapt the concept, it can be reading a book in a rocking chair on a breezy summer's day in the island of Cuba. Hygge is slow-paced. Well, everything is slower in the tropics. You watch a lizard moving slowly, stopping and looking at you, eyes blinking, hanging out on the garden wall. Hygge advises you to be in the here and now and enjoy the simple pleasures of life. I can sit on the stairs leading up to the porch of my house, slurping an iced shaved snow cone with red syrup. Summers are endless, and I do a lot of dolce far niente, even when I don't know what that is. I don't have a sense of time. I know the ice cream truck comes in the afternoon, and then the dessert vendor comes later. And then not so often, the fumigating truck. Cuba has a lot of mosquitoes. And when the fumigating truck comes spewing DDT smoke, we run after it for half a block, coughing and dying like soldiers on the sidewalk. That's a fun game. We also play Tarzan and Jane and cowboys and Indians. colonizer games because we are not yet woke. When Castro's revolution comes, we invent a new game, agrarian reform, and have to cultivate the land. There are little patches of land around the house, and that's where we plant our mango trees. I'm having a Hygge moment in a rocking chair in our covered porch. I'm alone, about to finish my first book. It's about a girl named Hygge who lives in Switzerland, surrounded by goats and mountains with snow. I wonder if the snow feels like the shaved ice cone I just finished, but without the syrup. Hygge lives with her grandfather, who is kind. He makes goat cheese. I eat white cream cheese with guava. Her grandfather looks like Santa, and Hygge is a blonde. The end. I feel accomplished. I finished my first book. I'm thirsty and call, Cristo, Cristo. She comes in fast, worried. ¿Qué pasa? I say, get me some water. What's wrong with your legs? I'm exhausted from reading. Get it yourself. And then Cristo adds, haven't you heard? The days of slavery are over. Wow, she's been saying that a lot these days. I remember the first day I met Cristo. I was sitting on the stairs, looking down as my grandmother interviewed her. My grandmother asked, Nombre? She says, Cristobalina, Cristo for short. My grandmother asks, Edad? Cristo says, 17. ¿Qué? My grandmother asks. Cristo says, 17. Wow, she's 17. That's old. She said she can't cook, and that annoys my grandmother, who will have to teach her. She will look after the kids, clean shop. She will refer to her as señora. Her bedroom is next to the kitchen. She will use the bathroom attached to the house that is in the back. Her day off is Sunday. Cristo has a round face, thick hair, yellow skin, and a full figure. I start to follow her around the house, and she says, what are you, my shadow? And then she starts to sing. She has a beautiful voice. When I sing, she stops me. Soon she's an excellent cook, and she lets me pound the steak with a meat tenderizer, and I stick my fingers into the meat. We go to the supermarket together. One day when we take my cousin Terry, who's 2 years old, and she's sucking a lollipop and starts to gag and turns red, Cristo quickly flips her, holding her by the leg, smacks her back, and the lollipop drops. We've been warned about the dangers of hard candy. You choke, you die. Cristo winks at me and says, our secret. At the supermarket, Cristo plays with the butcher, asking, what's on sale? Because la señora doesn't give her much money. She says, oye, que tiene bueno, bonito y barato. Good, pretty, and cheap. He laughs, and she gets more steak for less money. I'm having so much fun with her. I can't give this up, not yet. I get an idea. I wait for my mother to come home from work. She works, and that's rare for Cuban moms. I see her rounding the corner coming, and she's like a pretty lady in a movie with high heels. As soon as she starts to enter the house, I follow her into the bedroom and start to beg, please, please don't send me to kindergarten. I'm just a kid. Kindergarten can wait. I don't know how I did it, but she says, okay. When my mother finally goes to enroll me in kindergarten, the teacher looks at me and says to her, look at her. She's too old. We'll put her in first grade. I remember my first day of school. I was asleep in bed with my mom on one side and Cristo on the other, and each took a foot and gently put a sock on and then a shoe on and said, come on, get up, go to the bathroom, wash your face, and get dressed. Wow, this is the good life. Okay, there were cracks in this idyllic paradise. I can think of, okay, so that's the excerpt I want to leave you with, a little teaser of an excerpt. So maybe you'll come and listen to the two other podcasts. This is Cuban Roots. The next one is America Is, and the third one is The Revolution Comes. So as you can see, I made maybe a little flub of, mistakes, which I love mistakes because, you know, they're part of what's lively in real life. So if you listen to the podcast, that won't be there because we had a terrific sound editor. So I want to now bring in Solana Chehtman, who is a programmer, an amazing curator, and through those two, you know, curating and programming, she really is an amazing art activist. She's Latinx, and I was really excited to meet her when I did a show, before I did a show at the High Line. So without further ado, I want to bring in Solana Chehtman.
Yay! Thank you, Carmelita. What
Yay.
an honor to be here in conversation with you and for this amazing project. I am fascinated. I want to start saying to everyone, you won't be able to stop listening. If you're a binger like me, you want more. It's truly fascinating. And I wanted to say it's kind of, you know, 100 years of solitude meets serial, meets, you know, everything is there, the characters. How did this project come about? Why a podcast?
Why a podcast? Why a podcast? Well, what happened was I was writing a memoir. That, you know, I had to write a memoir, and I was having a memoir that was a two-pronged project where it was a written memoir for a book and also a live memoir performance. So I was doing two things, but because of the pandemic, you know, couldn't do live, you know, performance. I mean, I was hoping when I got to be in project number one, by this time we'd be, you know, doing theater live, but that is not the case, unfortunately. And I was trying to figure out, okay, what do I do? And I started thinking, well, maybe we film things. And, you know, that was a little crazy because filming is difficult, you know. And then I went to another longtime collaborator, Uzi Parnez, who said, why don't you do a podcast? And it was like, oh my God, a podcast, great. Because I've been doing a little bit of like taping for this project called Artists in Residence, where I had to do a kind of podcast, but it was only one episode. You know, it was a takeoff on the Franklin Delano Roosevelt fireside chats, where artists came and we presented a sort of chat, you know, to bring to the public, you know, from an artist perspective. That was important to us. So it was kind of like, oh yeah, podcast makes a lot of sense. And I thought, this is going to be great because it's going to be so easy. I was so wrong. Because podcasts, you know, they're their own form. And I had to learn, you know, there's a site and there's a platform. What's the difference between them? I mean, there's a lot of technical stuff that goes into it, but it's a wonderful form. And that actually, when I started writing for the podcast, I got really excited about the project. It was kind of like, boy, I'm really excited now to write my memoir because, you know, I can see it being longer and I can see it being short. You know, it's a kind of like a haiku, you know, you can cut things up. And then if people want more, it can be the book they can read. So it was really a kind of great way to do it. And my sister, actually, Ella, was the one that said, you know, you gotta do a memoir. I think it'll be a really good project. So those things, you know, turned into podcasts. And when we were, you know, thinking a podcast, we met our really good friend who's also a collaborator, Lisa Schwartz, and we're all sitting at dinner. And this is what really I love about, you know, sometimes exchanging ideas over food because you're relaxed, you're drinking, and we're drinking. And so I'm with Ella and with Elisa Schwartz, and I'm going, you know, and I started to tell a story of my memoir, which I hadn't yet given to Ella to read. And I started to tell the story, and she goes, that's not what happened. And I go, oh my God, I love it. Here's my title. That's not what happened. So in a way, it's really great when you have those things, because without even knowing it, it was like, I love it. That's not what happened. It's a great thing because memory is my memory. It's not her memory. We lived and we were part of the same experiences, being sisters, but we saw it in very different ways. So our, you know, and the act of remembering, I mean, sometimes you kind of go like, I used to read this thing that said that sometimes the act of remembering is, now I'm going to show my age because, it's like a Xerox copy. When you used to put Xerox copy, it goes into different generations. So it fades. So one thing fades and fades. And what you remember is really the last time that you remembered, in a way.
Story.
So I'm not sure about that, but I love the image of like the Xerox and, if remembering and then changing. But I think even when you remember, and you consider, it's like considering acts that happened, that you see things very differently now at different stages in your life.
Absolutely. And you kind of recreate it, right? Like, and you can reinvent it, which is fascinating. And with this title and with this fight with Ella about like who remembers how much do we believe of this? These are truly fascinating characters.
Yeah, but I try to be as accurate as possible. I mean, I've done shows where I've used my grandmother, for instance. I use my grandmother. I like what's really interesting to me is like I'm more afraid of doing like a real memoir of like what I experienced, rather than sometimes I take the same events that have happened and I transformed them by making very spectacular. Like first show that I had was Memories of the Revolution, which I did with Lucy Farnez, and that was like two of the stories that my father told me, when he was in the revolution. So I use his stuff, but it's like, it's Carmelita's revolution, and it's campy, and women playing men. So it's a very different sensibility. And here I'm more pared down and talking about what, trying to figure out what did happen and how to look at people. You look at people from the past and you start having a new vision for them. It's kind of like, oh, now I can see my father in a very different way than I had seen him when I was, a teenager, because he was in and out of our lives. So, I may have been really angry in my 20s. That's no longer, it's like, that's so far gone. Now it's like, boy, what a character. So things change. And also my grandmother, I tended when I was young, I was like, oh my God, she's just saying old stuff. And then I looked at her life and I'm going like, oh my God, she accomplished a lot, and what she did with her life and how she took care of it. It was really interesting. And also the type of life that she was leading in the type of era. She was born in 1898. So I revisit, one of the episodes is 1898. And kind of like, interesting what was going on in 1898 when somebody's born, and all the things we see in our lifetimes, my grandmother saw in 1898, from TVs to movies to, airplanes to cars to computers, so that to me is fascinating, when you have had a long life, all the things that you're able to see, throughout your life.
Yeah, absolutely. And it also feels also even as a history lesson in the sense of like your dad's involvement with the Cuban Revolution and El Comandante.
Yeah, I'm really, it is, I've always been interested in, a kind of revolutionary take, because as artists, how are we part of the revolution and how are we going against what's given to us? And to me, that's a real interesting, how artists are part of something that goes against the social norms that, perhaps need shaking up and perhaps need invention. We have to go a different way and we have to be more just, more, so all those things I think were really important. And he did, he did fight in the revolution. To me, that's so, wow, it's like, fighting guns and that kind of stuff is really, and he knew Castro, he knew the Che, so those things are to me a bit, it's like, wow, what a different life than I had. And then he became a CIA person. It's like all these things that you kind of go like, wow.
And it also goes through, Cuba and Miami and here. How does that all inform your life and your practice, of course, as an artist?
Well, you write from where, from where you are, or, unless you're doing sci-fi and then you try to learn as much as you can, but it's always based. Like when I did my, what I was saying before that I went on a tangent, because I tend to do that, it was like I used my grandmother in a piece that, where she was a parrot. So I've always used fantasy to talk about real things, because they're, even fantasy has to be based on something real. So, the parrot was my grandmother in the Elian Gonzalez piece, where, it's about the shipwrecked Cuban boy, that happened in the night, and that really pulled Cubans apart, and at that point it was like, a very dual, fight between Cubans. It's like you're either for or against Castro. I mean, there was no in between, no gray areas, which I don't think that is anymore. And I'm hoping that it becomes more that, it's so, the Cuba, informed me, I think that some people, might have come here and, at early age and just embraced it a lot more. And somehow I knew where I fit when I was growing up in Cuba. I knew my life. I liked my life. That's why I said, I didn't want to leave because I liked it. I had a sense of belonging. And then when I came here, it was all different, and you have to change. And now I'm very happy I did. I mean, and it's really wonderful to be able, as my uncle said, we have the ability to laugh into languages. And I think that's great because it's bicultural. Because, a joke, and since I work in humor, a joke is, it has to do a lot with culture.
Yeah.
It's not,
yeah.
And you being, also an immigrant, you kind of know that stuff.
Absolutely. And I think that's why we connect so well.
Yeah.
Although your work is for everyone. And something you were saying, I feel that something that we as Latinx in particular tend to do is create our own communities wherever we go. Yeah. It feels like when you were leaving Cuba, you were mourning that community that you were living. But since you've been here, you've created your own communities, Wow Cafe. And of course, you were talking about your collaboration with Ella, now with Soho Rep and Mark Ribot. And I think collaboration is really important to you. I don't know if you want to talk a little more about that. I think
collaboration is really, I just, that's what I love. It's like, I love theater. I think because when one can collaborate, it's more than one piece, it's a grander. And it's also Wow to me. I mean, I wouldn't be here without Wow. Because they were doing theater, Peggy Shaw and Lois Weaver, amazing visionaries. And they had this idea, not just them, but, a whole slew of women who became part of Wow. And we were really doing theater at a time that, nobody was going to look at, lesbians and, and edgy work. And Holly Hughes came from, Holly Hughes was a visual artist and she became a writer and she became a performer. And Lisa Crone too. I mean, she thought she was going to, maybe act. And she became not only a writer, but, also a performer. And, she went on to Broadway. So it's like people, we at Wow, and it was a real community. People, if somebody got hurt or, I once had a fire and the first thing that happened was like women came to help. So there was it wasn't just theater. It was, theater, it was sex, it was community, it was a lot of stuff. That really, it was one of the richest times in my life. And I would not be here without that, without, their support. In a way, we wouldn't be here, like all the people of Wow that have done really well and have gone on to careers, they wouldn't have gotten there if it hadn't been for that kind of support group, Yeah.
And it
taught me about feminism. It taught me about feminism being plural, not a singular thing, because at first feminism, I thought, ooh, I'm not sure I'm down with this because they have to be so, and I did see somebody who was a woman against pornography and, it was like, oh no, yes, I did. That's another story, but, but so, I thought, oh, that's not, quite, what it is, but it was, yeah. So you have another question? Forget the pornography. Pornography is, as Holly Hughes said, Holly Hughes, one of the NEA, the National Endowment for the Arts, defunded artists. And he said, oh my God, if I was, they said that her work was pornographic. He said, if it was pornographic, I'd be making money. I wouldn't be asking for a grant. So it's like, yeah, you're right. So those kinds of things were part of the WOW community. And again, and with Jose Munoz, he brought me into the Latino community, and INTAR did too. We all went to INTAR, and one of the most wonderful legacy of INTAR is having Marirene Fornés teach a slew of playwrights, that are working today, in theater. I mean, Irene was, just amazing as a passionate artist, and and then we, it's like, it's funny, you go through stages and then you meet other people. I mean, I met you through Gonzalo, and Gonzalo, it's like biggest supporter. I mean, I love men, that are really supportive of women. And that's what I've always found Gonzalo to be. I mean, it's just really, quite amazing. Just like, Jose Munoz was like that too. Really making sure that, people who haven't gotten their dues, they're going to shed a light on. And that's really important.
Yeah. And you keep passing it on to new generations. You were talking about Alisa recently. I think that's amazing, the work that you do. You've been teaching?
Yes, I've been teaching. I've been teaching theater, which is really fun, and also the kind of theater I do, my last class was at Harvard, and yeah. And it was a really, the resources that they have, at the theater, dance, and media department. I mean, it's just amazing. And I had a really wonderful class where they created their own queer cabaret. And I really made sure, like, listen, you don't have to be queer to have a cabaret. You can be an ally. It doesn't matter. I mean, as long as we all participate, and it was a wonderful class where, some of the students were, the students were really, really bright. They were a little too driven. I would say, aim lower, don't be so, try for a little failure once in a while, not, don't, because they didn't know how to relax, but it was a wonderful class. And, we really did this queer cabaret that I was really proud of, and really wonderful. And the person who ran the program, Deb, was really wonderful. Deb Levine, was really, she came from NYU.
Here,
so those
sending
are
you comments in the chat.
Yeah. So it was like the you always have. Oh, you always have to make connections, which is really wonderful. It was one thing that I think, WOW gave me a type of collaboration, and Jose was an amazing connector. He would have these parties that were salons at his house that, that's where we met Alisa. And that's where we met also another wonderful Cuban artist, Yalit Romagosa, who then went on, and we saw her at the taller that we were giving with, my sister does talleres, which are, workshops for professional development for Latinx, artists, and that's really a good thing, because it makes them, it's like a step, to something else. And so there are a lot of so Alisa, who did that, is now, part of like the Leslie Lohman Museum, teaching with Ella, and and then Yali does costumes, but she's so it's like a real mixing of making sure that people are connected. And that was pretty much Jose. Jose was like the glue that kept people together, which I thought was really wonderful.
And you dedicate an episode of the podcast to him, to the two Joses.
Yes. And there will be more of the Jose, because Jose is worth more. Jose Munoz is really, he did, I barely tapped into it. But I like the idea of two Joses that are very different, from different generations, but they both were exiles. They both, lived in New York, but they both were really culture vultures, and they really thought that culture was really important to society. I think that Jose Marti said something about, a country that doesn't regard its poetry as is not worth much. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, he said it more beautiful, but it was that kind of mentality of like making sure that, that comes into play, into the civic realm, that art is really important. So, and Jose was that, and Jose would tell people, you gotta be a public intellectual, you gotta really stand for something. And Jose was really wonderful at shining light on women, many women, but people that, he was interested in finding people who were diamonds in the rough and writing about them. He really was quite an incredible mind.
And again, such a professor of generations, literally, of people who venerate him in the field. So such an amazing opportunity for the two of you to work together. And Carmelita, just to come back, and I want to remind everyone that you can ask questions, and I'll relay them to Carmelita. We have a little more time, and I want to make sure that everyone can get their questions in. But also coming back to the podcast, what do you feel you learned from yourself in this exercise of, I was asking you before we started about, like, how do you remember all this? And I don't know if you want to share a little bit.
Yeah, when you ask that, it's really interesting because you think you remember less than you do. And all it needs is like, right now we went through a pandemic, and one of the things that it did that I think is very valuable is to hit pause, just take a, and that doesn't mean to stop, but it means to really slow down and reflect on what's going on. And we did that with, I did that. I learned more about, African-American history than I knew going into, coming out of school. I mean, much, much more. The 1619 project was an amazing, amazing project. And, it's like, you kind of go like, wow, how amazing is that? And how important, and how that got us to really have began a conversation. I mean, Black Lives Matter became much more where everybody is throwing those words around. Now that can become very easy and facile, but it's really important that at least it begins a conversation that we haven't had. So I think those moments of pausing and thinking, and I urge people, we should all write our memoirs. It doesn't mean that everybody should publish it or anything, but it's really interesting to think about your life and who has influenced you, and how that's happened, and what your part is in history, and how do you go against the history that you're given, and how do you want to rewrite history, and through what characters, and so those things, sitting down, I realized, boy, I've always thought, my father gave me nothing. My grandmother was old. And then you start sitting down and remembering, and you see through very different lens now as an adult. So that was really interesting. I found out that what I thought was like, I was nothing like my father. I found out that our lives were, a revolutionary and artist are not, not the 9 to 5, not the, it's a very different kind of, being. Although right now, I think that's for everybody. I mean, I think our lives are changing so that 9 to 5, especially on Zoom, or I think our lives have really changed in this new pandemic, post-pandemic.
Yeah, and I would go a little farther with that. And I think regardless of the 9 to 5, I think the revolutionary part of how you used art to say certain things from the beginning when you arrived here till now. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that, but I think you used art very politically and to make a lot of change.
Yeah, it's almost like you have to, and also I work with people who are very political. So we all we're in that sphere of it's gotta mean something, but you hope that it's, you hope that it's entertaining. that it's not hitting you, over the head, that it's a little bit more complicated, that it's like, so you can think about it. And so, and the best things are where you're thinking about them. It's not given to you and it's already, something that's really easy. So yeah, I've always worked with political people. I mean, even, when I started in this Carmelita, and I got dressed in Uzi Parnez and Ella Troiano, my sister who is my collaborator, they dressed me up and that had a meaning. Those fruits, we dealt with a stereotype and some people were really upset at that time, but you have to change because you can't be the Carmelita with the fruits. It's, you have to, move on, you have to evolve. So, because it doesn't mean anything. The fruits back then were offensive. They're not anymore. So and that I find interesting that there is a change and you have to be, I want to remain, one of the reasons why I teach is I want to remain vital. I want to have a conversation with people that are younger, that may have a very different take on things, so yeah. The politics were really important, and the politics, of being at WOW and being women and being lesbians. I mean, I thought that was really very important because there was nothing in the mainstream for that. And we weren't, it wasn't going to happen. I mean, we were ahead of our times. I mean, now things are happening and we're going like, because, my sister did a movie called Carmelita Tropicana, Your Kunst is your Waffen, your art is your weapon. And, some people really loved it, and it got awards and, she showed it to somebody, I think it was at Disney and the woman loved it. There's several people who really loved it, but they didn't know what to do with it. It was almost like, we don't know how it was too edgy, too weird, so but it's interesting. And now there's an opening, for much more. I mean, I think it's, you belong to a time, and I'm very grateful to the time that I belonged in, because certainly other people were really worse off. And there was a lot, so, and I grew up in the 80s with that, doing theater, and it was a very joyful moment for a time. And then things with AIDS got us, totally depressed.
Yeah. And it's, again, fascinating how Carmelita has evolved throughout all this time as a character, as an alter ego, maybe even more. And how much of that is reflected in, and it's like, when on Star Wars you have the prequel, like this podcast is a little bit of a prequel of understanding all of these influences that got Carmelita to be who she is.
Yeah. And it's dealing more with a real, like, okay, so what, so, and it's interesting to use different forms. And one of the things about the podcast that interests me is like, it was the voice, and that was all you had. It wasn't, and I love theater because of its visuals. You put an outfit on me and I feel like I can go on stage. It's like, yes. And that's how sometimes I build a character with an outfit, but this was different. This is just voice. But I found that during the pandemic, one of the things, at the very beginning, I had 5 friends who were sick. And they were really sick. And, I have a friend who, has a hospital in Brooklyn, and he was going through a really hard time because it was, there was no PPE. So in those moments of real fear, what really calmed me down was having at night my telephone, and I would put either, a Dharma talk, a meditation, because I needed that. And then I needed also escape. So I would have, Ella said, oh, you should, do a movie. The sound of movies is really good. So I put on, My Man Godfrey, a screwball comedy that was really light and escapist, but it had it had a bit of politics too in it, but it was like a real, so I went for both the escape and the, and the, okay, this is what's really happening, and look at your fear, look at your anxiety and go into it, don't, because it's what is. So, but I found podcasts like a voice in my head, soothing, really, really soothing. And at that time, that's what I needed. So I thought like, oh, podcast,
Yeah.
Good. Yeah. It's a new form.
And it's kind of naked storytelling in a way. It's like the purest form. And you do it so well. Seriously.
And you know what's really great? That you can listen to a podcast and you can be washing dishes, or you can be in your Peloton. I mean, it's like, and whenever, wherever, you can listen to it. And I think that's a good thing. You don't have to pay all your, the senses are different.
Again, not to keep comparing you to your dad, but at some point you mentioned he did talk radio or something, and this reminded me of radio novelas, right? Like that same idea.
Yeah. Yes, he did interviews. He was well known in the Miami, 90s Cuba exile community. He would go and talk about what was going on, because at that point, I think, Russia had fallen, and everybody expected, okay, Cuba is going to go any moment now. It really, as we know, it didn't. So it's really, but he was somebody who really people were listening to in the exile community.
Yeah.
And he has a radio show. And
here, our only question is about episodes. So I would say there's 3 episodes now. There's going to be more later. How many more are coming? And
there's already we have 9 episodes. And what we're doing is tonight we launch 3 episodes, so you can listen to it at whatever time. Some are shorter than others, so that's kind of like a good thing. So there's no time. It's like some are 11 minutes. The first one, it's the longest, I believe, but the others are shorter. And, so we have 9 episodes. 3 are going out today. And then we will be, having other episodes. So you can listen, you can find out about my dad and insects.
That was going to be my ending. Please tell us. I know it's a little spoiler alert, but it's a worth it, because I think you will still be surprised to learn more.
Yeah, my dad would, had, he had cancer, pancreatic cancer, and not the good cancer, and he, one of his cures, he came up with an alternative cure, and one of the cures was, eating. I don't know how he came. I don't know how he came to this, but he would eat insects. And supposedly when the insects die, they secreted an enzyme in your stomach, and killed the cancer. I mean, that was, so those are things that, he's a colorful dad. And my mom is also amazing. And I think she got upset because it's like, what about me? But she will be in it. I was trying to do people who can't complain because they're dead, like my grandmother, who did a flan recipe, was amazing, and she can't, although, she told me when a friend of ours asked for the flan recipe, my grandmother gave me 2 pieces of paper, and she said, "This is for you, and this is for your friend." And they were different recipes, so. And I divulge. So if you come to the podcast, you will learn how to make, Mima's flan, which is foolproof, amazing. And even one of the Soho, I love Soho Rep, one of the board members, Frank, actually, called me for the recipe. I gave it to him, and he says that it's foolproof, and he loved it. That's why I love Soho Rep. They even make recipes. They share.
What an amazing project to be a part of, this one, right? Last question that is coming here on the Q&A. It says, listening to this podcast was a beautiful reminder that our experiences do not define us, but shape who we are. She mentions your father and asks, do you feel working on this project helped you heal from that or any other experiences?
To heal? Yeah, I think that, yes, because you're looking at it from a very different perspective. You're looking at, you're no longer that person. And I think the memoirs that I really like are the memoirs where people sort of learn something, or at least they learn to make peace with things. I don't like memoirs, and I've read a couple of memoirs that were very bitter. And I didn't get, they were well written, but they were bitter, and I just didn't get into them. I like them when they're honest, when you can really get into the person's life. Jeanette Winterson has a really beautiful memoir called Why Be why be happy when you can be normal? You know, and she's amazing, an amazing writer, and I love that. You know, Margot Jefferson too. It's an amazing memoir all about, you know, her being an African American, you know, well off on a different class in Chicago, and you know, and she mixes history, which I love. You know, she mixes history, she mixes her own family, but you know, which I find very enriching. And you want that. You want, you know, okay, who are you now, and how are you going to look at things, and how are you going to hopefully grow? Not, you know, like, oh, my daddy, my mommy did this. You know, you're hoping that, you know, you're better. You know, we all have our things. So, you know, and we've been very lucky. Us as Latinos, we as Cuban Americans, been super lucky. We're like, you know, I feel badly that, you know, other immigrant groups haven't had the kind of reception that Cubans have in this country, you know, because, you know, we all deserve a more equal kind of thing.
Yeah, and absolutely. And taking you to a completely different place, the collaboration with Ella, right?
Yes.
As a dramaturg, as a director, and then with Mark Ribot, you were saying before, the fake Cuban.
I know. Yeah, you see, my sister's really good at coming up with, you know, it's like, here I was, you know, having to do the podcast, and we were trying to figure out, first of all, I didn't even know what the project was going to be. You know, how do you write for a podcast? How is it, you know, so you have to do the research of like how to cut things, how to, you know, because people have a different attention span when you're, you know, you're on your headphones. And so I tried to figure that out. And I then talked to Ella, you know, she was going through things, and, you know, we sat down and we wanted music, because I think music livens things. And I think Cuba is so musical. So we started listening to music that already exists. We thought it was easier to go where things already exist. And she had this idea of like having, you know, after she read it, like she said, I think we should have, you know, somebody on a guitar, somebody, you know, and she knew Mark Ribot was a friend of John Zorn's, who's played with him. And Ella was a really good friend, is a good friend of John Zorn, and has collaborated with him and has done shows where she uses the music. So they have a, you know, they've collaborated before. And so we were listening, she said, how about this? And she listened, you know, we listened together to a concert that he had done. And it was a concert, you know, of a band he used to have called Cubanos Postizos, which I really love the name, because it means fake Cubans or prosthetic Cubans. And he was very influenced by Arsenio Rodriguez, who was this really great Cuban musician. So you know, who did amazing Cuban music. So, you know, we heard it and we said, oh my God, maybe we can use that. But then things, you know, you'd be surprised at the hoops that one has to go through with, because we thought, okay, take this, but you know, who owns that music? It's a concert, you know, where was it played? What are the copyright? You know, so he said, listen, it's too complicated. And he was in Europe and said, I'll come, I'll do, you know, I'll tape something and I'll give it to you. You know, I'll tape something for you. That way you have it and do it. And I thought that was so generous of him to, you know, do that. And I kind of really love the music because it's an off, you know, it's not really Cuban. It's a kind of Cuban, but not really. So it's a kind of hybrid, and I love hybrids. I love the idea of hybrid, of not, you know, because as Cuban American, you feel like, you know, you're in this world, the other world, you're, you know, feet on both worlds, and sort of like a new thing arises. It's sort of like, you know, the rhythms of Africa came to Cuba and it became mambo and cha-cha-cha. And the same thing, you know, with rhythms that came from, you know, Africa and came to the US and they became jazz and blues. You know, it's like how it turns and it becomes something else. Then something else grows out of that. And I sort of like love that. So Ella was really influential in saying, I think it should be, you know, and, you know, she played it for me and it was like, oh my God, I love it. I love it. It's very, you know, some of it is very soulful. It's not your usual, it's not what you usually think of like Cuban, you know, like, you know, if you think, you know, happy. And it's not that. It's a different set of, of a different way of thinking.
And it marks the tone of the storytelling so well. It complements so beautifully.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, but we're trying. I mean, I wish that I could have those musical abilities. I've always wanted to sing. It's like, oh my God, and music is just, wonderful. When we heard it, we just, fell in love. And that was one of the happiest moments. It's like going to, our sound editor, going to her house, Margaret Crimmins, and it was Ella, me and her, and listening to see how it fit. Because at first we weren't sure, because we began the episode and it's kind of like, that's not what happened. And it seemed very abrupt. But then, with it was okay. It kind of fit. So, and we were happily surprised about it. It was kind of like, oh, great. It works.
Yeah, no, absolutely does. It's gorgeous. I have no words to say to everyone, like how you need to do yourself a favor and listen to this podcast. It's truly, again, fascinating, entertaining, but also you learn so much about you, about everything that happened. Amazing. So thank you so much for letting me be here with you tonight.
Oh my God, Solana, you know how I love you, I love my Latinx, I love, and we have bonded through so many shows. We've gone to see shows, and you even came here to Soho Rep to look at the show that I had, a workshop, at Soho Rep with Brandon Jacobs Jenkins. You were there. You loved
I was
it.
there.
So, exactly. So
through shows and food, I think the most important things.
Exactly. Food. Totally.
Well, I think we're at time.
Okay.
But again, thank you so much. I recommend everyone to hear the podcast, and I will be seeing you very soon.
Yes. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in, and tell people if you like it. Bye. Adios.